Welcome back to Trending in Education. This is Mike Palmer speaking, and today I'm very happy to be joined by Sarah Daniels, the CEO and co-founder of Blue Canoe, an English language learning company focused on teaching spoken English to professionals and others who want to speak professionally. As it says on their website, it's good business spoken clearly. Sarah, thank you very much for joining and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mike. It's very, very nice to be here.
So for our hardcore listeners, which there are many out there, they may have been following Trending in Education for our 3 full years of existence. And one of our very early shows was on English language learning. And we were all drawn to the idea of Blue Canoe, the name of Blue Canoe, and what y'all are trying to accomplish. I'd love to hear in your words, what is Blue Canoe and what problems are you trying to solve?
Great. So Blue Canoe is an AI app, and its goal is to provide a way for non-native English speakers to improve their clarity and their confidence in speaking English. Mm-hmm. And we do this in a very, very specific way that's based on neuroscience. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure you've noticed, and all of your listeners have noticed, that in general, if somebody is learning a new language, and particularly if they're learning it after the age of 5, it is much easier to become proficient in learning the vocabulary and the grammar and the reading. And speaking is just so hard. Mm-hmm. And in fact, even when we try very, very hard to speak a foreign language, whether a second language or a third language, oftentimes the sounds and the rhythms of our first language, our native language, color the way that we're speaking that new language, no matter how hard we try. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that is that those sounds and rhythms are unconsciously buried in our brain. And in fact, it's a very specific part of our brain, Broca's area. We can talk more about that. But the traditional ways of learning don't recognize that fact. Mm-hmm. And so they're not overcoming that barrier. And so in general, people's confidence and ability to speak clearly and really express themselves and get their job done mm-hmm. Is very much diminished. And yep. Blue Canoe changes that. We have an amazing neuroscience methodology called the color vowel system, mm-hmm. which was co-created by a woman named Karen Taylor, who I'm now proud to say is running our education team. Excellent. And over the last 20 years, she developed this system that actually works. Blue Canoe took that system out of the classroom, added technology, and made it into an app.
That's fantastic. Yeah, and we'll want to get into to all of that because I think all of that, you had us at neuroscience. So we love to talk about the brain and how we learn and how all these things are related. The other thing that you were mentioning that I think is also interesting when you think about the problems that Blue Canoe is trying to address is how personal how one speaks is and how much it's tied to your sort of the way you envision yourself, the way others see you, the way others may evaluate you. We talk a lot about social and emotional learning and sort of the whole student methodologies. Being able to speak clearly and confidently is very fundamental to being human in many contexts. And I'd love to hear your perspective on that, because it does seem like giving learners the right tools to be able to develop that confidence and facility with spoken English can really transform the opportunities that they can then engage with, and also maybe begin to change how they feel about themselves just in general. So I'd love to hear more a bit about that before we get into the neuroscience of things.
Those are very, very interesting and important topics. So first, let's say that it is clear around the world that English has been chosen as the general language of business. It probably, if we were all being rational, it probably wouldn't be. It's not the easiest language, but
I'm
it just
still, yeah, I'm still pulling for Esperanto, but I think the ship may have sailed. Yeah.
I think that ship has sailed.
Yeah.
So all around the world, really, people are having to learn English. It's the language of opportunity. And if you are a multinational company and you're working, let's say, even if you're working in Japan these days, and you're working with customers and with clients and with partners all over the world, they're not going to be speaking Japanese. They're going to be speaking English. So even within your company, you're moving towards speaking English. And so, you need to be able to express yourself and your ideas and be persuasive of all of the wonderful ideas you have with your colleagues in this new language. And that's hard. And they're also, so that's point one. Point two, there is a long history in human development of conquerors trying to make everybody use their language, right? And that there's a burden of power there that is not a comfortable burden, right? And they're also within societies. I mean, all you have to do is think about My Fair Lady in England to think that even within the same language, different accents have this notion of better or powerful versus not. And those are not very nice notions either. And so, but yet you have to be able to communicate with each other.
Right.
The philosophy that we embrace wholeheartedly is that somebody's accent, their way of speaking, is part of who they are. And that is beautiful.
Yep.
And the only thing we're doing is trying to open the door so that people understand what are the elements of when I speak that I need to do so that I am well understood, so that there is a bridge, so that I can be who I want to be and express who I want to be. And we work very, very carefully with people on how to do that, how to add these ability to be well understood. You will never hear us talking about getting rid of your accent. No, it is about being understood. And even just approaching it from that language really helps people to feel more comfortable that this is about them expressing themselves. So that's important.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting too, particularly if you're not fluent in multiple languages. You can take your ability to speak a language as just a given, and if you don't really have to wrestle with the challenge of, as an adult, acquiring another language, or if you're doing so, it's sort of a hobby or to make your travel more pleasant. It's different than if it really is so intricately tied to your sort of career growth and other opportunities. I think that's important perspective, perhaps for folks who are less close to English language learning as sort of a field. So that stuff's pretty. So that's good context setting, and I am a fan of accents. And my wife also has a wonderful accent. So and she listens to this podcast, so I'm not even speaking out of turn there, I hope. But the related thing though is, like, why is English? English probably shouldn't be the universal language if you think about how hard it is to speak.
Correct.
As well, right? So can you give us a little bit of, you were talking me through the complexities of English with a level of depth that I hadn't really gone into before. So I'd love you to share some of that with our listeners.
Absolutely. So English is a particularly difficult language when you look at the languages around the world to speak. And all right, I'm not going to say it is the most difficult. That doesn't really matter, but it is on the difficult end of the spectrum.
Yeah, I hear Basque and Celtic are harder, but I don't know if that's actually true. They're also not really in the running for international language. So yeah.
No. But let's start with one of the reasons why English is hard, and it is because In English, the way a word is spelled is not a good indication of how you need to pronounce it, right? And that divergence of the, the written English and the spoken English, happened many centuries ago. And it is a much greater divergence than in many other languages. Like take Spanish, right? If you learn the sounds of Spanish, they're very consistent. So if you know those sounds and you see a new word, you can very easily guess how to say it. Mm-hmm. And that is not true in English. When we try to introduce phonics and we pretend that phonics really describes English, except for all of those exceptions, we are so fooling ourselves.
Yeah.
So, I mean, think about, I'll give just some examples. The word LOW and HOW. Mm-hmm. In most languages around the world, those two words would sound very similar.
Right.
But in English, of course, they don't. One is
right.
low, and the other one isn't ho, it's how.
Right.
And there's no reason why anybody would expect those two words to sound different, mm-hmm. right? But they do.
Right.
And so that makes it tricky.
Sure.
A second aspect that makes it tricky is that English is what's called a stress-based language.
Tell me about it. I'm sorry. I had to get that in there. Yeah, go ahead.
Exactly. And we imbue meaning with adding emphasis to certain syllables in a word. Mm-hmm. And with that emphasis, we actually stretch out the time that we spend on that syllable and correspondingly smush the time that we spend on the other syllables. And that's within a word. Mm-hmm. And then we carry that over to sentences and ideas, and we give certain words more prominence mm-hmm. in our sentences than other words, and that changes the meaning.
Yeah.
And these ideas to a native English speaker, which we don't even really, it's not even conscious that we're doing that, we're just doing it.
Yep.
It is a very weird thing for most other languages, which are syllable-timed languages. Right. And getting somebody to be aware of that and to start to do it is very, very difficult. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'll give an example. Let's imagine that there's somebody who is somewhere else and they are studying for their PhD, and now they have a PhD in molecular physics, something like amazing, right? And they've done all of this in English.
Right.
And so they can read all of this English, but they're not necessarily speaking it. And now all of a sudden they need to explain their ideas. They're on stage, they're defending their thesis, they're having a conversation. And think about this word molecule. So the word molecule has the emphasis on that first syllable, molecule. Mm-hmm. But then all of a sudden we, for no reason whatsoever, we change the stress when we say molecular chemistry. It's not molecule chemistry, it's molecular chemistry.
That's true.
Like, how would a non-native English speaker know that? There's no way of knowing it. Right. And yet their meaning will be lost and everybody will be left trying to figure out what they said and not listening to the rest of their sentence if they don't move that stress. Mm. So the stress-based nature of our system is really complicated, mm-hmm. and it is unlike any other language around the world. So that's really confusing. Mm-hmm. And then, so that's two reasons. And then the third reason is that this brain thing, and mm-hmm. that we cannot hear the new sounds. And because English has so many sounds, the fact that we can't hear them makes life pretty complicated. And I can go into that more if you want me to.
Yeah, I'd love to, because this we were talking about that. I try not to, prior to having a son, I was the representative of a non-parent in terms of our diverse perspectives on the show. But now that I feel like I have a 10-month-old at home, everything is about being a parent. So apologies to listeners out there who feel like I beat that drum too much. But like that was part of what was really fascinating to me, was the way you were describing the criticality of the first 4 or 5 years of life, to being able to even hear and process and understand the different types of sounds that are in a particular language. So I'd love to hear you expand on that.
Great. All right. So we all know that when we're a child, our brains are super active and are growing, and the synapses are just going like crazy. one of the very specialized parts of our brain is an area in the left hemisphere that's actually called Broca's area.
Mm-hmm.
And let's more or less say that that's the place where we process language sounds and rhythms.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so if I'm a baby, I'm paying attention to all the important caregivers around me, right? I mean, and maybe that's a survival thing.
Sure.
And my brain is paying attention to these sounds and rhythms. So if I'm hearing English, I hear English sounds and I hear English rhythms of this special rhythm we have with stress and prominence.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm exposed to Chinese as a caregiver, or one of my parents, I'm memorizing all of those amazing sounds and tones.
Right.
Same thing for any language. But as I get a little bit older, the brain is a very efficient organism. And if a pathway is not being used, it gets pruned.
Right.
And so let's say, your baby's not exposed to Chinese. So it's going to lose the innate ability to pay attention to tone, right? Because in English, tone's not as important.
Right.
Similarly, like if you were growing up in Spain or in anywhere in Latin America, and you were just hearing Spanish is a syllable time language, so you wouldn't be paying attention to stress. And so you lose those pathways.
Right.
Okay? And the same thing with different sounds of the language. So in English, our vowels carry most of the meaning of a word.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so vowels are super important. In English, we have 14 different vowel sounds that are essential. Yeah. Only 5 vowels, but 14 vowel sounds.
Yeah.
In Spanish, for example, there are only 5 vowel sounds. So somebody growing up only hearing Spanish would end up, imagine their brain has 5 pathways. I'm holding up my hand. You can't see it, but it has 5 pathways. And now that brain, Broca's area, is listening as an adult or as a young adult to English. And we are speaking with 14 vowels. So those 14 vowels hit those 5 vowel pathways, and they have to go on one of those pathways.
Yep.
So on average, 3 of our English vowels merge and are on one pathway. And then that person can't really hear the difference.
Right.
So traditionally, like the difference between a pen and a pin, the S sound that we make and the is sound get confused, and they can't really differentiate them.
Mm-hmm.
Or a classic one that some of our listeners might know, in Japanese, the R and the L sounds get confused, right? Mm-hmm. Because in that language there isn't a difference, but in English there is.
Yep.
And so if the brain cannot let us hear these sounds because it's of the way it's processing them, you end up with that classic conflict in a English or in a language class where the teacher is saying something lovely and the student is trying to repeat, and then the teacher says, no, that's not right. Listen better. And the teacher says it again and the student tries. And each time they're hearing it not correctly because their brain is reinterpreting it. And that's a wall that cannot be bridged with just using listening alone. And we've learned that in order to overcome that, we have to use other parts of the brain because that Broca's area is just pretty stubborn.
Right. Right. And that brings in the sort of broader connectivity to other like processing centers of the brain, so that, we talk a lot about the picture superiority effect and the dual coding principle, which are pretty central to learning science. Picture superiority effect says that if you pair a visual image with text or audio, it significantly improves memory retention, assuming that it's reinforcing the idea. And that's an example of the dual coding principle, which is, when information and inputs are processed through more than one perceptual mode at the same time, or even over time, it consolidates and deepens the memory. So that this is why I always I haven't quite put together my business plan for my olfactory learning product, but yeah, I would I'd love to hear you talk a little more about that. So like we've gotten as far as Broca's area, but that's not really sufficient, particularly for adult learners, because in many ways it's a more robust and fluid space when you're very young, and then as you get older, your brain has developed in different ways, so that a lot of what Blue Canoe is doing, to my understanding, is focusing on how should we teach spoken language to adult learners, and that's different than the way you would teach it to a child who's sort of growing up with native speakers around them.
So yeah, actually, let me modify that a little bit.
Please.
The color vowel system, which is, again, Karen Taylor's amazing system that intentionally builds up all of these activities and this understanding built on a multimodal brain learning.
Yep.
It actually is great for all ages.
Oh,
and in fact, there are elementary schools that use it to supplement phonics, because it is a much more logical system.
Got it.
As we get older, it is more and more necessary to do this, but it is still helpful, I think, at any level. And particularly if you have any learning differences like dyslexia, adding this multi-brain modal system is really, really helpful.
Yeah, that's
early on.
Thank you for that too, because that's important too, because I know there's a lot within language learning. Obviously, some folks are so heavily into phonics, they recommend you get hooked on them. But beyond that, that's one method of language learning for children in particular. But I have seen some folks in the field talk about how we're perhaps oversubscribed there. So I think that's an important qualification, that the methodology that Blue Canoe uses works wonderfully for that same population. It's just when you reach a certain age, it becomes more the best path as opposed to an alternative path. Got it.
Or a supplementary path.
Got it. That makes sense.
When you're young,
because you still need the phonics. Yeah.
Phonics describes a portion of English, but it doesn't describe all of English, right? There's too many quote unquote exceptions.
Makes sense. Yeah.
But so let's talk a little bit more. And by the way, if any of your learners are interested, if you Google the color vowel system, you will find lots of additional information and videos. It's been around about 20 years.
Yeah.
Most TESOL conferences that you go to, you can take a certification class in it. We offer certification classes for teachers, etc.
And what is TESOL?
Teachers of English as a second language. No, I didn't get the right initials, but it's one of the best accreditation organizations for teachers of English as a second language.
Got it. And then the color vowel system is also it's I'm going to show my age, but it's the Palmolive ad. You're soaking in it, right? So like Blue Canoe is an example of that, right? So I'd love, could you explain for our listeners what this is?
Yes, absolutely. So this system starts out by understanding these difficulties in English that I talked about. And it says, okay, let's actually, instead of trying to help listeners sound out words, which would assume that the spelling would lead to good pronunciation.
Right.
Let's instead help learners understand using other parts of the brain. So, as I said, English is a stress-based language. So one of the first things that we have to know, or a learner needs to know about every single word in English, is which syllable carries the stress. Which syllable should I emphasize? Is it desert or dessert? Right. And that's a nice word because it really means something else. Right. And I really like my dessert.
Yes.
And so you have to decide which syllable carries it. And in the color vowel system, we make that visual. As you said, visual is a very important part of the brain.
Yep.
And we mark it up and we underline the syllable that gets the stress. Okay. So we use the visual part of the brain for that. But the second thing we do is we actually make them make a movement with their hand. If you could see me, you would see that I open up my hand, and as I make as I say the syllable that has the stress, I push out my hand to the far side of my arm on the vowel. So I say dessert. And that makes me stretch out the time I spend on the vowel of that stress syllable, because in English, it really is, it's not just intonation that changes, it's the time we spend on that vowel, dessert.
Yeah.
And by moving my hand, I'm using the kinesthetic part of my brain, which is a very large part of the brain that crosses both hemispheres. And so it's great for learning and noticing. And I'm using, again, the visual part of my brain.
Right.
Okay. So those are two parts of the brain.
That does bring new meaning to the phrase "talking with your hands" too. You know?
It does. It absolutely does.
Yeah.
The second, so that's one aspect of the system. Another aspect of the system says the vowel sounds of a word, and particularly the vowel sound at that peak of stress, carries the most meaning in the word. Like subconsciously, as we're listening to somebody speak English, we're waiting and we're listening for that vowel sound. And if there are other errors that the person makes, we don't really pay attention to those, but we really are noticing that vowel sound.
Interesting.
And so the color vowel system says, well, if vowels are so important, let's name them and make them more accessible.
Yep.
We have 14 key vowel sounds in English. And in phonics, there's no ways to name them, right? So this letter O, in English, it's one letter, but it has 7 different key sounds.
Right.
And we name each of these vowel sounds with an anchor phrase that the first word is a color and the second word is an object.
Yep.
And each of those words has to have the main sound we're naming embedded in it.
Yep.
Okay. So the E sound in English, we name it green tea.
Nice.
And you can imagine there's a little icon that is green.
Yeah.
And it's a teacup.
Yep.
And so, and it embeds, so green is a green tea word, and tea is a green tea word. So green tea E. The word teacher is a green tea word. Teacher, green tea teacher, green tea tea. Yeah. Or another one is the sound. We name that purple shirt. And you can see a little icon of a purple shirt. Yeah. And so the sound is at the heart of shirt and purple.
Right.
So each of the key sounds that you can learn in English have one of these icons that does multiple things at the same time. It is a visual clue to somebody of what sound it should be. Oh, that's that E sound, green tea, and it's really easily to remember.
Yep.
It uses the image visual cortex of the brain, which is a powerful part of the brain. It also, because there is a pattern forming, green tea, E, teacher, that E gets repeated. When our brain hears patterns, the music part of the brain wakes up and starts paying attention.
Yep.
And then if we use our hands on the vowel sound, green tea, teacher, the movement part of our brain. So all of a sudden we have about 5 or 6 parts of the brain all going to work to help us really hear and produce that really important sound and be more comprehensible. And this is in comparison to a standard classroom where if you had an MRI, you would only see that one little dot of Broca's area.
Right.
And it's powerful.
Right. That's fascinating. Yeah. And as you mentioned, this is this is a patented method. This is evidence-based research is where a lot of the whole approach that Blue Canoe is taking comes from. And I imagine the results kind of speak for themselves. So like this is out in the world, people are using it. The company seems to be doing well. Can you talk about where you're heading with this and how you're operating, and if folks want to learn more, where they should go, what they should do?
Absolutely. Well, so again, I want to just give all of the credit first to Karen Taylor and her team, right? They, over 20 years, have built up and understood and built and created the color vowel system. And before we ever even met them, they've been training tens of thousands of ESL teachers around the world, and through them, millions of students who have been learning.
Yep.
When I met Karen Taylor and really started to understand, the genius of this color vowel system, from my background, which is the technology side of ed tech, I said, wow, this is a wonderful opportunity to take this great methodology and to add technology, or to great methodology and add technology to it so that we could share it with more people. And so Blue Canoe took the patented and copyrighted work that Karen Taylor had done, and we now have an exclusive license to digitize that, right?
Got it. Yep.
And then we added, with my co-founder, Tony Andrews, on the technology side, we added machine learning and speech recognition and gamification and mobile app and engagement and design and all of this, so that it is now this mobile app.
Wow.
And along the way, by the way, we convinced Karen to come along this journey with us as head of our education team, which is was important. And so this app now I think the latest look I had was it's used in more than 40 countries around the world with very, very different native languages. We are not selling B2C, we are selling B2B.
Okay.
And so we have English language learning companies who partner with us.
Yep.
And they integrate our app into their overall solution.
Got
so, if you're in some country around the world and you are trying to improve your English, you can now improve your English and have that teacher be trained in the color vowel system and get the Blue Canoe app. So let's say you're going to class once a week or twice a week, and in between times, you are getting to practice 10 minutes a day using our app and getting feedback from our virtual AI teacher. So in that regard, we are, spreading the gospel of the color vowel system to all of these teachers who then can share it with their students. And then we are supplementing them with being able to practice every single day, no matter where they are, 10 minutes a day, to really get those muscles in the brains going. Because changing the wiring of your brain is something that's better done in 10 or 20 minutes a day every day than 2 hours once a week.
Right.
And so we do that. We also sell directly to multinational companies who want to use it for their employees, right? And so we have many companies around the world, in Japan, in China, in Europe, in Latin America, who their employees now have the benefit of using Blue Canoe to continue to improve their English and their productivity at work. So not only do the learners benefit, but the employers benefit as well.
That's great. Yeah, and it's clearly like we were saying at the top, like this can be really transformative for the individuals who are limited by by the challenges they faced acquiring proficiency in English. Through tools like this, it does open up access to opportunity for folks who really do want to excel, particularly on a global level. So like if you do want to be part of a large global organization, there's very few nowadays that don't have some component that is powered by English. So like if you're in a non-English speaking country, you will see ads for how to acquire proficiency in English, and how that frequently is positioned as sort of the gateway to another level of earning and career prospects and all the things that many of us are seeking. So it's a wonderful mission you have going there. We are coming close to time for today. Would love to go more into the rhymes. You had rhymes, you had music, you had dance. It's like a variety show while we're learning English, which is wonderful. We always like to ask our guests, are there any trends out there that you're tracking that you think are worth understanding in the world? Doesn't have to be in language learning. It could also be more broadly, just in the next, say, 5 to 10 years. You mentioned artificial intelligence. Are there aspects of this that you think folks who want to be out ahead, want to understand where the puck is heading, that you'd want to have on folks' radar? Any thoughts?
Lots of different thoughts. I mean, I certainly, from the technology side, the power of AI and machine learning to do things that we can do now that we couldn't have done even a few years ago is pretty amazing.
Yep.
And the power to do it in a device as small and convenient as a mobile app that sits in your pocket, right? That, we know that there are some downsides of technology, but there are also lots of upsides. And certainly at Blue Canoe, we are very conscious of trying to do good in the world. And the things that we're doing just would not have been possible, a short time ago. But the power of not only machine learning to collect the data and then to be smart about figuring things out. I mean, the specific way we use machine learning is to really understand the learner's mistakes and to be able to give them targeted feedback, right? If we go back to the theory of learning, just telling somebody, that was wrong, try again, is nowhere near as effective as saying, oh, that was wrong because you used a green T vowel there and you should have used a silver pin vowel, right? Very, very different. And it's the machine learning that allows us to do that, analyzing the mistake and finding the patterns and being able to give that personalized individual experience. So I see in so many different companies, apps, opportunities, the ability to use machine learning and other forms of AI to improve our ability to help people in so many ways. And certainly it's a trend that is worth watching.
And all this, I guess, is built on natural language processing and automating the machine's ability to listen and understand language as it's produced by the learner, right? So if I'm understanding you right, that the app allows the learner to speak into the app and then be responded to by the AI tutor. Is that the idea?
It does. In our case, at least today, it's not spontaneous speech. So it's not like a Siri or Alexa that's listening to your spontaneous speech and then trying from your context to guess what you said. That also is a very amazing thing, but it's quite different from what we're doing, because in that context, Siri, for example, is guessing what you said and doesn't care if you made pronunciation errors. They're sort of filling in the gap and saying, oh, that phrase wouldn't have made sense unless you had said a certain word. And so they're guessing you said that word. We actually are doing the opposite. In all of our activities, we already have, we know what we wanted you to say in order for it to be well understood. And so then when you're doing our activities and you record yourself, we instantly compare what you said to what we needed it to be said, down to the phoneme level, the rhythm, the stress, etc. And so we've done a lot of patent pending changes to our speech recognition processor to be able to understand that.
That's interesting.
We then, if you will, come up with how many errors or potential differences there are from what the learner said to what we needed them to be said. And that's when we use the machine learning, and we are smart about knowing, is that an important difference or an unimportant difference? And if it's an important difference, how do we characterize that and tell them what that is? How do we say to them, oh, that's an error because you put the stress on the first syllable instead of the second syllable, or you didn't have any stress at all, or you used the wrong peak vowel, or you confused an R and an L, or so that's what we do.
So it's much more targeted to the specifics of the speech, and it's more designed around providing examples that will specifically teach the right way to pronounce things and the right way to because that's a really interesting distinction too, like within the Alexas and the Siris as a context, they're trying to sort of normalize what you're saying, and in the case of trying to learn the spoken English, you need to instruct the learner in terms of the specifics of the sounds they're producing. That's really interesting. I learned something right there. Thank you. I learned something throughout this conversation, but I did learn something right there. So Sarah Daniels, CEO of Blue Canoe, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Mike. It was, as always, it was a really fun conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. And then for those of you out there who want to learn more about Blue Canoe, you can find them online. It's bluecanoelearning.com was the website. And check out Sarah Daniels and the color vowel syndrome. Hopefully you've been taking copious notes. There's plenty to learn out there. And for our listeners, our regular listeners, we'll be back again soon on Trending in Education. Thanks again for listening. Cool.